while I whip this out.
Hey, boys, look what I got here.
Hey, where are the white women at?
Sometimes I sleep, sometimes it's not for days. The people I meet.
I have one question, Dr. Frankenstein.
That's Frankenstein.
I beg your pardon?
Oh, hear me! All pay heed! The Lord Jehovah, has given unto you these 15... 10 commandments for all to obey.
Welcome to the 70's versus the 80's. And if you ever drank Sunny D out of a crazy straw while you're reading the back of a box of Count Chocula, this is the podcast for you. Hello, my babies. This is Wolfman Mike on the mic, and I can talk pop culture all night. And please remember to wash your hands after you wipe. And as always, I am joined by Brian, a.k.a. Bry Guy, a.k.a. I don't even remember asking for fries on the side guy. We have a big episode planned today. We have Mel Brooks' 4 most hilarious movies, 2 from the 70's, 2 from the 80's, so that way you can plan, see which one you want to go back, rewatch, or watch for the very first time. But first things first, it's hot, my babies. It's August. It's old school hot. So me and Brian are going to start out talking water wars before super soakers were invented. And then we're going to talk those icy treats in a tube. What did you call those in the area where you grew up? Everybody had a different name for them. And finally, sadly, we have another immemorial segment. That's right, we lost another MTV pop icon and a Saturday morning icon. So we will say a few words to remember them. But first, let's start with Beat the Heat. All right, Brian, it's like, it's August. It's like 100 degrees heat index outside. It's bad now, but it used to be worse in the 70's and 80's. We had less ways to beat the heat, or did we have better ways? What do you think?
Well, I grew up in a house that didn't have central air conditioning until 1988. So we'd had lots of beat the heat tricks. I know in a previous episode, and you can go back and listen to it, I think when we had the Bleeding Graves crossover episode with The Shining, we talked about the Ice Cream Man and about Dairy Queen. Well, I grew up in an area where there wasn't an Ice Cream Man, so we had beat the heat tricks in the 70's and 80's. One of them was water fights, right? You get into your swimsuits, you get squirt guns, or we use the Kemp's ice cream buckets, and then we had a big barrel and a like a metal wash tub that we would fill up so they wouldn't be ice cold. And then you'd go and refill your squirt guns there, refill your buckets, and you'd run all around the yard and splash each other with water. And if it was 80 out, if it was 95, it wouldn't matter because you're going to be soaking wet, and that's going to help keep you cool. And a lot of fun. And then, of course, you can take out your built-up rage on your siblings and on your neighbor friends. My brother and sister to this day will tell you that I was not fair in water fights. I had a way of throwing water out of the Kemp's ice cream bucket that would just slap them and cause them to have pain. So that's, I guess, as the oldest brother, that's what you do.
What about in the 1980s? Remember kind of when they the Terminator Rambo, they came out with those first semi-automated water guns. Remember those? You'd put the batteries in them.
Yes. So.
And they had clips, water clips.
Yes. So since the 80s was a different time, and about laws were maybe a little bit more lax or something, so we had a get together with some of our, and I think it was like our advanced English class had a get together at a park where Ted Paulson ate 15 hot dogs. He could have been Joey Chestnut, like if we would just trained him better, I think. But we were driving ran into Apple Valley to get more supplies, and I'm name checking on here. No Sanes, he goes by Tony now, was laying in the back of my dad's S10 pickup truck, had one of those battery-powered Uzi-shaped squirt guns, and then when we stopped at the light making the left turn from 42 onto Cedar Avenue, here's a little local flavor for our New Zealand fans, he bopped up in the back of the truck and sprayed the car behind him, who was another friend of ours, with the water gun, and then ducked back down. It's like, could you see that happening today?
No, those machine guns were you were right, they were Uzi shaped. You could get clips. They were black. There's no way they would have those today. And then I was just looking up at the Super Soakers, who kind of came out a little years later, and they were actually better, but they were all neon colored.
Yes.
And I don't even think those were battery powered.
Those were
they were
engineered
pressurized.
Well, air pressure. Yep.
Air pressure, yeah, because we had those ones that were battery powered, which seemed really cool and modern at the time, but the Super Soakers were much better that came out after that. But
some of those Super Soakers were almost like fire hoses. They could, if you pumped it right and you took your time and you made sure you had your seal good, because sometimes if you wouldn't get the water tank threaded in properly, the seal it'd lose some of the pressure. But you could build up pressure, and it would shoot like 50 feet and a nice spray of water, so you could really soak your neighbor kids, or of course the younger brother and sister.
We had a bus driver back in early high school that would let us should let anything go, like any water fights the last week of school. And we just took it to the hilt, and we got it. I know we had like 1 inch of standing water, and she's just like, enough. We had like 1 inch of standing water, and then we were just, everybody's putting soap in their water guns and stuff. And so, do you remember these Super Soakers? They kind of talking about water pressure. Do you remember those water rockets? Do you remember those at all?
You could pump them up, and they'd shoot into the air. That was kind of the similar theory, but I never bought one or never used them, but I did see them.
They would say they could go up to 100 feet, and we'd get them up higher sometimes. It was just like you'd pump them, you'd fill them with water, and it was just like a squirt gun, except, and then when you pull the trigger, it would just shoot up like a rocket because all the pressure. And it would be good, but it would always land on someone's roof, and you'd lose it eventually.
Right, and yeah, unless you know the neighbor well enough to climb up on their roof if there's any kind of prevailing wind. Back to the bus thing, I grew up on the Coates bus route, and that was notorious for bad behavior, and so we were like locked down, and they'd like search us before we'd get on those last weeks of school, so we couldn't bring anything like squirt guns or anything on. So I'm kind of jealous of you, Mike.
Don't be jealous. My bus ride, I would get on at 6 a.m, and I'd have because I lived way out in the boonies, and I'd have like an hour-long
Oh, yeah.
bus ride.
That way, you get on at like 6:20 for a 7:30 start.
And I remember being out. We'd have to push, so we'd get stuck in the mud. We'd have to try to push the bus. We'd get chased by Rottweilers. We went through a police standoff one time. It was just like an hour-long ride. And it was just something different every time. Okay, how about what would you do to stay cool, edible wise? I remember. So now there's the thing, Mr. Freezy's Ice Pops. How many Jumbo Pops? How many names do these things? We're talking about those frozen things in the ice in the little cellophane tubes, but they had so many names. I know every part of the country, every part of the world has a different name for them.
Yeah, those were fantastic. You'd put them in your freezer. We had a chest freezer in our basement, so then you'd run into the basement, which was a little cooler than the upstairs, and then grab one of those out, and you'd have to go to mom and get a scissor until you figured out how to rip them off with your teeth, or just brute force tear them open. And then you'd eat it, but then little bits would drip into the bottom, right? And so there would be a little bit of just the liquid, and then so you'd save that, and then that would, at the end, you'd get that just burst of just liquid.
Yeah. And I was looking at it, looks like Mr. Freezy is still on sale at Amazon. I know we have Flavor Ice. That's another brand name, but
yep.
Yeah, those things had so many names, and when people would come ask I used to work in the grocery store, and they'd have like 20 different names for the same product. But
Yeah, it's the one product. They have one kind of it, but it's asked for by 20 different names. What was your favorite flavor or color? Colors and flavors. And what was your least favorite color flavor?
for some reason, I really like green. I don't know. I guess it was supposed to be lime, I'm guessing.
It's not green apple. I heard one time someone changed the flavor of something, a treat like this, from lime to green apple, and there's almost like a revolt. Yeah, lime. That was one of my favorites, the green.
I always like blue raspberry because they just ran out of colors, so they're just like, yeah, raspberry's blue now because they didn't have it blue, wasn't in use.
I watched a YouTube video on how that came about, and it's the flavor is unique. It's not necessarily raspberry flavor. But it is a flavor, and it's blue raspberry is a thing, and it is because it was that whole colors got associated with flavors. What was your least favorite?
Grape. I don't know why. You think it would be great, and then it was just like
no.
It was too rich or something. It was too
purple grape. It was pedestrian. It was terrible. And the same thing with popsicles.
Yeah.
You popsicles, and then we always got the ones with the two sticks which were meant to be broken apart.
Yeah.
And then
they would never break evenly. It was
they don't.
Like a wishbone. Yeah.
And then when my parents, of course, when we were young, would always break it in half. We each get one, and then I have heard from my kids that when they've gone over to Grandma and Grandpa's house, that they just get both sticks, and I'm like, that never happened to us when we were a kid.
Okay, how about a cup of ice cream? Does it taste better when it's in a little baseball helmet or regular?
100%. I saw someone, and I wanted to have another baseball episode because the one that we did maybe 2 years ago, the audio quality is not good. I think it was a great content for that episode, but the audio quality wasn't good. We've kind of learned stuff since then. But they put new rules in for baseball this year I kind of want to talk about. But someone said maybe the real rules is that they have to do, and they listed off a couple things, and then it said everything at the concession stand has to be served in a little miniature helmet. That would make the game better. Yeah, 100% ice cream tastes better in a little miniature helmet. And then if you're a Twins fan at the old Met, if you're dipping into it with a wooden stick.
Well, yeah, it's better in a wooden stick. And the old days, we'd get the helmet and it would just be in that one monocolor. Now, my girlfriend works for the Minnesota Twins, our baseball team here. And now they got like the alternative helmets. They got like 3 different colors. And I'm surprised they don't have those giant ear flaps on them, so it'd be hard to eat because you wouldn't be able to get your spoon in because there'd be so many ear flaps in the way.
Or like John Olerud or whoever that was that had the one ear flap that came around real weird back in I think that's like a 80's baseball reference.
All right. We got anything else, Brian? Or?
There were just so many ways. So a couple stories. So sometimes my parents, especially my dad, after work would get involved in one of our epic water fights or on a weekend. And so then 2 stories we try to get it. One is he propped the service door in the garage open just barely, and then he rested a ice cream bucket full of water on it trying to get me. And I think he ended up getting either maybe my sister or my mom. So that backfired on him. And then one time we just were kind of finishing one up, and he had a bucket of water, and a neighbor kid rode up who hadn't been in our water fight. He rode up on his bike, and my dad heard someone coming up behind him, thought it was me, turned and just doused the neighbor kid with water.
Yeah, I remember those, going back to those automated water guns. Like you said, that's all we would do is try to ambush. And that was like, that reminds me of my dad's saying whenever we were young and when we screwed something up, he goes, you guys could F up an ambush. That was his favorite. And I just love that saying. All right. We got anything else? Or?
No, I think we've given people a taste of, you were a little rambunctious in the 70s and 80s and how you stayed cool before air conditioning and being able to stream anything on TV. We'd go outside and we'd take out our frustrations on our siblings, like I said, and our friends with good old-fashioned water. And if you go to Facebook and ask in the comments, I'll tell you the trick of how to throw water out of an ice cream bucket that like you can hear it like slap the person. That it's kind of mean, but if you have siblings that you need to do this to, ask in the comments and I'll direct message you how to do that.
Let's get down to it.
So Mike, in June, the fabulous Mel Brooks, Melvin James Brooks, just turned 97 years old. And I think that he was a big part of the 70s and 80s. I think we should look at a couple of his movies from the 1970s and then a couple of his movies from the 1980s, and we're going to do a Mel Brooks, or we're going to do a 70s versus 80s of the Mel Brooks movies. And then at the end, I think we should also, these four movies we're going to talk, are these the four best Mel Brooks movies that would be on the Mount Rushmore of Mel Brooks movies? Or would he have done other work that would be better than one of these four that we're going to discuss? And so I think we should just get right at it. The two from the 1970s that I think we should discuss are Blazing Saddles and Young Frankenstein.
Yeah, amazing picks. Like you said, a 97-year-old Mel Brooks here. He wrote, produced, directed, and starred in some of these movies, and they kind of are the quintessential comedies of those two decades. Everything, and I think he gave a pretty good speech to beat the Russian hockey team back in 1982, right? Or 1980, not.
Absolutely.
I guess that was Herb Brooks. Sorry,
right, but we can certainly Herb Brooks would certainly be a topic for a future show. He's very, very 1970s and 1980s centric, and as Minnesotans, we of course love our fellow Minnesotans. The fun thing, Blazing Saddles and Young Frankenstein did come out in the same year, with Young Frankenstein coming out very late. I think it was a December release in 74. But so both of these are from 1974. Very much, I guess, when you're talking, he's very much the American style of like a Monty Python, where it's
perfect example.
It's spoofing. He's using a comedy and spoofs and poking fun at things, and poking fun at things that are near and dear to him, poking fun at things that are near and dear to other people, to, in my opinion, especially with Blazing Saddles, to prove a bigger point.
Absolutely. And I guess when I was rewatching, these, going through the main scenes on YouTube and stuff, I guess I had forgotten how the irrelevant humor too, where like the theme music starts up and then they show, they're breaking the fourth wall all the time. Like they show the orchestra there sitting in the desert. And it's like, and I guess I forgot, how it kind of led to the movie. I really seen the origins of the movie Airplane and Naked Gun, that kind of humor coming from these movies, which I wasn't expecting to see.
Yeah, definitely. This is the like the template for what they did with Airplane and Naked Gun and those kind of movies. Yeah, we talked in the Shining episode. It was Stanley Kubrick with the people from the Bleeding Grave podcast. Check out their podcast and check out this the Shining episode about breaking the fourth wall. But that was minor compared to what Mel Brooks did in Blazing Saddles.
We'll start with Blazing Saddles. That's the first of these four movies. It's a movie that couldn't be made today, but like you said, I think it really has the sarcasm at the social issues it was poking holes at, I think were groundbreaking.
Absolutely. When you watch people watching, like you can watch on YouTube people reacting to things, and people react to Blazing Saddles, and they get hung up on one thing, and I think everyone knows what that one thing is, and it's the language. But what Mel Brooks is doing, it's almost kind of like that. In music, you'll do it, or you're repeating something to really drive home the point of what it is. And in that case, it is the racism, and getting to the point of when they get the payoff of people working together and people changing their minds and everything at the end. Which is what they're using that for. It's not just that they're using it for shock value or anything like that. And I feel that people that watch it today, because that word's not used in the lexicon very much anymore, except for, I think African Americans have taken it to, if you use the thing that's been meant to demean you, you kind of take some of the power back. So I think that's why it's used by young African Americans.
I guess what it really kind of also surprised me how much heart the movie has. I think, Gene Wilder, who's I love. He has such a great line in Blazing Saddles where he's like,
"You've got to remember that these are just simple farmers. These are people of the land. The common clay of the New West. You know.
I'm glad you brought that up because that was improvised. And that's why when you watch that scene, because Cleavon Little, the fantastic actor that played Sheriff Bart, wasn't expecting that, and he gives a genuine laugh reaction. That's one of the best parts of the movie. And the three best acting, I mean, there's some great acting in this, but I think Cleavon Little and Gene Wilder do have some chemistry together, and they're great as the two, our heroes of the movie. And then Harvey Korman, at first you just want to hate him because he's kind of like, he's the 1%, right? And everyone hating him. He's like scheming for everything. But so you hate the character, but the role, the way that Harvey Korman played it, and he broke the third wall or fourth wall. And I think that just was a wonderful, his acting in this is overlooked when we review it.
And I know we're going to talk about Gene Wilder a lot. I kind of noticed the Mel Brooks movies, I kind of like them in order of how much he's in how much screen time Gene Wilder gets. So who just died a few years ago. What a legend. I mean, all the work he did with Richard Pryor later and Stir Crazy and all those movies.
Yeah, Gene Wilder really, I mean, I think Stir Crazy was late 70s, so really made at least three fantastic, huge, one of the, 10, 20 best movies of the whole decade have Gene Wilder in them.
Okay. And so now Young Frankenstein I can't believe they're both made in 74. Young Frankenstein's a black and white movie. When you look at Blazing Saddles, you can the cinematography kind of seems a little aged, it's got that weird color to it. And then you go to Young Frankenstein, which is, done in black and white on purpose because it's, Blazing Saddles is making fun of the country western genre. And then Young Frankenstein's kind of all the old horror movies. Young Frankenstein just seems like it was made 10 years later. I don't know, just because of the cinematography and stuff. I don't know. What do you have? What are your thoughts on Young Frankenstein?
Yeah, Young Frankenstein. So Gene Wilder, while starting the filming of Blazing Saddles, kind of him and Mel Brooks worked on this together. He kind of was, hey, could you, if I'm going to be in this movie for you, could you do this thing for me, the Young Frankenstein? And it really is. It's kind of an homage to all the Dracula and Frankenstein and those type movies, almost back to the 30s. And so I think that's why Mel Brooks chose to do it in black and white. I think it's one of the last films done in black and white. He did it for a purpose, and it's kind of both a spoof and an homage to those types of movies that we said, from the 30s and 40s and that time frame, and then really just is spoofing that whole horror movie genre, which we went and we talked about horror movies a little bit in the Shining episode, and I know we're going to touch back on those again closer to Halloween. I appreciate Young Frankenstein, for the humor and the spoofs. That's my kind of movie. I'm more into comedies and spoof comedies and things like that than I am into horror movies. But Young Frankenstein is a wonderful movie.
It's just the comedy in that movie is so. I like when they keep saying the woman's name and the horses keep bellowing every time they say it.
After you, Frau Blucher.
Yeah, like I said, this one has Gene Wilder on the screen probably the most, and he's just amazing. But then you got Marty Feldman and Peter Boyle, which is Peter Boyle, who was
before Everybody Loves Raymond fame.
Yeah, and he was doing Taxi Driver back in. Just crazy.
Yeah, Madeline Kahn's in both of them, Blazing Saddles and in Young Frankenstein. Mel Brooks then wasn't the Mel Brooks legend of today. He was he had the 2,000-year-old man bit, and he had also had the producers in the 60s. So he had some fame, but he wasn't huge. But he's he seemingly gets these people to want to come out and star in the movie because these are great casts in both of these movies with, like I said, Harvey Korman and Slim Pickens and Madeline Kahn. Gene Wilder in the first one, and then Young Frankenstein, you had mentioned all those people in it. So he's getting great casts, and that's almost adds to the magic of these movies if you get the people buy into it and you get some great casts, and you have Mel Brooks writing, and I think Richard Pryor partly wrote Blazing Saddles, even though he didn't star in it, and Gene Wilder and Mel Brooks did the screenplay for Young Frankenstein.
Yeah, and then the comedy is just nonstop, relentless, which I think kind of really leads into the movies that come later, like the Airplane, Naked Gun series type.
Well, and we had talked about it with the Marvel movies, of how Marvel movies, it's just right now a bunch of action, and then it's a setup for a punchline, setup for a punchline. You had brought that up, I think, when we were talking in our Jaws episode. These movies are like that, but they do have some better script, better written out, and it's not just, set up punchline and go on to the next thing. Very much things that I use in language. We talk about in other podcast episodes. We've talked about the phrases that still like you use on a daily basis or use in your current language. And I know that there's some from Blazing Saddles that I'll still use. Like today, we're recording in a day when it's going to be maybe 95, 96 out, and so I'll do that. It can't be more than 114 out, and of course the sheriff is near. Which is also a great scene. If you're not going to watch the whole movie, you should watch the whole movie. Don't get turned off by the language. Language is being used to accentuate the fact that all these people are going to work together for a solution, and that they realize that they have more in common than they have differences, and that's kind of the message of it, but done in a way of poking fun at everything, including maybe the best thing is all the little different stereotypes is when they're trying to sign up all the people to make the raid on Rock Ridge, and who's got the line of the scene with Harvey Korman listing off all the different people he wants. Well, Slim Pickens is looking for a writing utensil. It's funny. So then they're all signing that, and they got they've got the Mexican, we don't need no stinking badges. They've got bikers and everything. It's just all these stereotypes going along, and just these little gags that are. It's just everything. Or how like everyone's named Johnson in the town, and then there's the Howard Johnson ice cream shop, but then it's got one flavor. I mean, there's these little sight gags and stuff that you miss if you're, unless you've watched it a lot of times like I have.
Yeah, and like you said, it was just all the talent in this. It's like a comedy troupe. It's like like in the 2000s we had the Judd Apatow. Before that we had this Saturday Night Live. It's just when you get a bunch of funny people together, and they just have a like a leader. In this point is Mel Brooks directing, writing, producing, and then he just kind of lets the talent go in whatever direction they want to go in, and that's when you get the hilarious results. And I think this was maybe one of the earliest generations of that.
I believe you're right on with that. It's kind of like you can get a good movie with really good cast and a bliss script, and you can get a good movie with a really great script and a bliss cast. But the ones that become cinematic masterpieces have both. This is a well-written, funny movie, and it's a well-acted movie with a fantastic cast. And then, for me, it's a cinematic masterpiece along the lines of Blues Brothers.
And then having Blazing Saddles and Young Frankenstein both come out in 1974, I can't think of another director or whatever that had two impactful movies in the same year. I mean, it's happened before.
Both are high up on the different, you look at the different lists of best comedies of all time. Both of these are up there, as well they should be.
I think they get, Blazing Saddles gets like a 90 on Rotten Tomatoes, and then Young Frankenstein.
If you can get past the language and the like you said, that some of the dated cinematography, these were filmed in 73, 74, and appreciate them for what they are, which is very talented people sharing their talents with us. Yeah.
Can you think of any of the jokes in these movies that don't hit anymore, that kind of, I know because I watched Airplane recently, and there's like a part where a javelin goes into a wall, and you're like, it just it doesn't hit today, or I don't know what they're going for. Is there any jokes in these movies that you think don't?
Well, no, I haven't watched Young Frankenstein in its entirety for quite a while. Blazing Saddles, have probably watched it once this year in its entirety. And and you sometimes you do look for that when you or when you've gone from something for so long. So it's like the scene of them all sitting around the campfire, and it's the loud farting noises. It's like both that for me both seems sophomoric and timeless. Like, because that kind of humor is both sophomoric, but it's also, I mean, you can even on highbrow like NPR podcasts or stuff like that, there's still going to be like the bathroom humor. When Alex Karras, the former Detroit Lion who played Mongo, when he punches the horse out, when the guy's like, "You can't park," he like rides the ox into town and ties it up, and the guy rides up on a horse and says, "You can't park that there," and he punches the horse, and the horse falls down. It's a trained horse and a trained fall, but it's like, okay, that's are people going to be turned off by animal violence? But some of the fourth wall stuff is still great. Like there's when they're running through Rock Ridge and they're punching the old lady in the stomach, who later on says "up yours" to Cleavon Little, and then brings him a pie and to apologize and says, "But please have the taste to not tell anyone else that I was here." This is while he's still winning over while Sheriff Bart's winning over the whole town. And she breaks the law. It's like, have you ever seen such cruelty? I mean, that still I think is fantastic because they're breaking it and they're really driving home the point of Harvey Korman and his gang, Hedy Lamarr and his gang bad, and Sheriff Bart and the town people working together good. And it's very simple, but it's so well done that you're entertained while you get these messages of we should band together and see each other for what we are and work together.
All right. So we know that these two 1974 movies are masterpieces. Mel Brooks wasn't done there in the 1980s. He had a couple movies, too, that I think everybody will know or at least heard of.
So I believe the Mel Brooks 1970s movies set a pretty high bar. So 1980 saw two also very well-done comedies, History of the World Part 1, which came out in 1981, and Spaceballs, which came out in 1987. And I think we touched briefly on Spaceballs in a Star Wars episode we did a while back, but obviously we'll go at it fresh here. So of the two, I prefer History of the World Part 1. It's just kind of a bunch of little vignettes of different history scenes. Gregory Hines is in it. I think he does a fantastic job, and that's my favorite of these two. How about what are your thoughts on these 1980s Mel Brooks movies?
Yeah, I agree with you. I like History of the World Part 1 better. I mean, I like all four of these movies are just hilarious. I think Spaceballs for me is not, don't want to say weakest, but it just the Star Wars movie is now a classic cinema style of movie, but at the time it was more, I think that movie's more timely. And even though the jokes are all still funny, it just seemed like it was a little more timely than the other one. So I don't know if it translates as well as the other ones do, but or timeless.
Yeah, because the Star Wars starting in 77, so there's only 10 years of time for Star Wars to kind of enter into the pop culture. And so while it's, like you said, it's really good bits, and it's really, if you're into Star Wars and don't mind it kind of being poked fun at a little bit, then it's a fantastic movie. These other ones, Blazing Saddles, Westerns have been, probably the first movie ever shot was a Western. I think that The Great Train Escape or whatever. I can't remember what the name of the first movie, but Westerns. And then horror movies and the Draculas and the Frankenstein type movies, those had also been decades of those. So when Mel Brooks is spoofing those with the 70s Blazing Saddles and Young Frankenstein, that's really well established in the pop culture. Anyone can be a fan of these movies. But you're right, with Spaceballs, it's twofold. One is what you said, is the Star Wars thing had only been out for about 10 years, so it's not engulfed the pop culture as much. And then it also seems really, really specific, where it's just spoofing kind of the Star Wars things and maybe a little bit of Star Trek, but it's not spoofing a whole genre. It's really kind of spoofing just certain movies. So it's getting really more focused. And I think Robin Hood Men in Tights, which is in the 90s, so it's 70s, 80s adjacent, does the same thing. It's very specific to that, Robin Hood type movies, and Spaceballs is very specific to Star Wars. And so they're they're great at what they're doing, spoofing Star Wars, spoofing Robin Hood, but they're not as broad, and so there's not as many maybe comedy topics that you can touch on like you could in a Blazing Saddles, spoofing westerns, and Young Frankenstein spoofing the horror movies.
No, I just know History of the World Part 1. Who is it, the one that brings the 10 Commandments? Is that Moses, whoever that is? But when he comes down and he's got the 15 Commandments on the stone tablets, and I think that's one of the most, maybe top 10 comic lines in movies ever. I mean, that was just everywhere.
It is, because when we were growing up and you'd have snow packed on your driveway and you try to chisel it up and you'd get a big piece of it, my dad would always do that. I bring you these 15, and then he'd drop it and it breaks and scatters all on the driveway. 10 Commandments. So
yeah.
That is just a fantastic, top 10 funny things. Just the littlest things can it just catch you so funny.
And then I know in Spaceballs, I kind of like how the bad guys they all had like helmets that made them look like roll-on deodorant or something.
Yes. And which, I don't know, do they even make roll-on deodorants anymore? Or is that something that was like 70's and 80's? Because that's
another thing we're going to have to cover.
The thing.
Yeah. Roll-ons seem to be like a thing anymore.
It's like for people, for our younger listeners who've never had a roll-on, think of a oversized ballpoint pen with deodorant in it, and you're just drawing on underneath of your armpits.
They were kind of comfortable to roll on like that though, but yeah.
Well, and the shape, with it being the round ball, you can get all the nooks and crannies of your armpit, whereas a stick is not as precise. But
I don't think our listeners were expecting us to get so into the roll-on nooks and crannies of your armpits with the roll-on deodorant today.
We don't shy away from the difficult topics here at the 70's.
We do not.
No,
podcast. We do not. All right, so Brian, like if somebody is unfamiliar with Mel Brooks, what movie would you start them out on these?
I think I would go right to Blazing Saddles. It's a cinematic masterpiece. It's the first of these big four that we were talking about. It's kind of what Mel Brooks is about. He's poking fun at everything, nothing's off limits, and tells a story of let's work together, let's overcome our differences, work together to accomplish something, and spoofs the westerns of westerns. I would point someone to Blazing Saddles, as if you've never seen Mel Brooks before, watch Blazing Saddles. But I don't think you'll get the true appreciation of Brooks' brilliance. I suppose you would if you eventually watch all of these movies, but I think don't start at Spaceballs or even History of the World Part 1. Go back to the ones from the 70's. I remember there was someone, I can't remember who it was, who said that he was going to make their kids watch Spaceballs a few times before they ever watched any of the Star Wars movies, so that when they watched the Star Wars movies, they would just think they're unfunny Spaceballs. Which I've also heard that same thing with someone to have their child listen to Weird Al Yankovic's "Eat It" first before they listen to Michael Jackson's "Beat It," so they just think Michael Jackson was ripping off Weird Al. I think we've pretty much established it. 70's wins in the Mel Brooks face-off.
Yeah, but if you haven't seen one of these four movies, you can go and watch it. You'll be the winner because they're all hilarious from start to finish, and you just forget how much humor is packed into these. Yeah. Okay, guys, now we come to a sad part of our show. Since our last episode, we lost two more pop culture mavericks, and we just want to say a few words about them here in memorial. But for some reason, I first started out with a rant. Sorry about that. Why are we playing that song on the 70's versus the 80's? That's a 1995. I I think we all heard it a million times. I had to listen to it again when I had to edit it back in there. Let me tell you about, this is the Mike's rant section. We haven't done a rant here in a while. When I first heard that song, I went, like everybody else, I went to rushed out to see Titanic in '95, and then they played that song, and I was like, oh, that song, not so good. At least we won't have to hear it that many times. And then, Brian, of course, we all know what happened. They played that song in nonstop.
Yeah, you went to the grocery store and the auto parts store and the proctologist in the same day, and you'd hear the song at all three of those places.
That is, of course, was Celine Dion. And Brian, quick, name 3 other Celine Dion songs.
There's the one where she like really holds a note for a while. And then that
one.
There's I have no idea.
I'm right there with you. I can't name 3 others. I can't name one other Celine Dion song. And okay, so the thing is, and I guess she didn't even write the lyrics to that song, which we figured, we all know she married her manager. That was like,
good career move.
Yeah, like 30 years. Discovered her when she was a teenager, so that's kind of creepy.
That too.
And she's only 55 years old. I thought she was older than that. She's still this day, only 55 years old. But that brings us to a sad note. The reason I'm just going off on Celine Dion there is I was thinking, how come there was a talented artist that we never heard, and unfortunately, this day and age on 70s versus the 80s, we kind of got the obituary section where we have to talk about our artists are all getting older. But this one is not that old. I think she was only 59 years old, and I'm talking about Sinead O'Connor. And the reason I'm talking about this is her songs were not played on the radio. She got canceled. Brian, do you think anybody got canceled earlier and harder than Sinead O'Connor?
If you're going to look up, the textbook version of how someone gets canceled, it's what happened to Sinead O'Connor. She really hit it big. She had her first album was in '87, so that fits inside the 70s versus 80s, what we like to look at. But her breakthrough, or what made her famous in the United States, I think came out in 90 or 91. And then she had a Saturday Night Live appearance where what she was protesting was child abuse, and something that everyone can get behind of we want to try to stop child abuse in any of its forms. But she tore up a picture of the Pope with the connotation that there was the sexual abuse stuff in the Catholic Church, and the Pope at the time, was John Paul II, was doing nothing about it. And it really took 7 years before John Paul II acknowledged that there was some cover-ups of the sexual abuse happening in the Catholic Church. So what she was protesting was legitimate, but when you start go against religion or protest against something that people are into, you run the risk of getting canceled. She got canceled hard. Very talented singer. Not necessarily my cup of tea as far as listening. I didn't listen to that entire her breakthrough album until after she had passed, and you had recommended that I listen to it because there are some good songs on it. Very much like a female version of Bono, or kind of the Irish version of, say, like Sarah McLachlan or Edie Brickell. Kind of those kind of vocals, some sparse arrangements. Important lyrics are important, and I guess with her being Irish and all the strife that happens there, they're more apt to try to bring light to some plights that maybe here in this country we kind of want our music artists to just entertain us and provide us with art and leave the critical thinking and stuff, keep that out of the music. And that's, I think, what contributed to her getting canceled hard.
I mean, I was joking about it, but I think I like her voice even better than Celine Dion. Like, you hear this song was really huge on MTV. This song, The Emperor's New Clothes. You guys remember this one?
Maybe I was mean, but I really don't think so. You asked if I'm scared, and I said so.
And then another one I really liked, I just love these lyrics hit me so hard, where she said, this song's called The Last Day of Our Acquaintance, where she says, this is the last day of our acquaintance, we will meet soon in someone's office.
This is the last
So just great songs like that, folks. I know you haven't heard her songs because she was kind of canceled, and she did have some great songs. And she does a really good version of Don't Cry For Me, Argentina. Is that what that song's called, Brian?
I'm not sure if that's the name of it. It's from the musical Evita. I think it is Don't Cry For Me, Argentina.
Don't Cry For Me, Argentina. She does a great version of that. And so, yeah, just check her out. The good thing is about when these musical artists pass away, I mean, there's nothing good about it, but the good thing is on the streaming services, they do tend to jump up to number one, and I hope that happens with her. I know it happened to Gordon Lightfoot and Eddie Van Halen. Whenever someone passes away, their music automatically jumps up to number one, which is kind of a nice little way to memorial and get into their music if you haven't gotten into it before.
It is, because good music is good music, and timeless music is great. So we're going to talk a lot about 70s and 80s music on this show, but we also listen to more modern stuff, and I listen to stuff that's even older than the 70s and 80s. Good music is good music, crosses the spectrum of genres, and you owe it to yourself when one of these music greats passes, even if you weren't a fan, to give it a listen, especially when you have the experience of lots of years of looking back and enjoying different kind of music to see what made them great. And it's almost like a walk down memory lane as far as the instrumentation and the production values that was done differently in the 90s versus what it is today, or for us looking at the 70s versus the 80s.
And then here's another song we just played a couple episodes ago. So, Brian, who does that make you think of immediately?
Tequila?
Yeah.
Well, it makes me think of Paul Rubens, and
Pee-wee.
Pee-wee, good old Pee-wee Herman. We touched base on him a little bit in our Blues Brothers versus Grease episode, because he did a little role in the Blues Brothers. He was a comedian at heart, started out with the Groundlings. He developed his Pee Wee Herman character there with kind of some help from Phil Hartman, the late great Phil Hartman that we've talked about. And I think I maybe even took Phil Hartman in the SNL fantasy draft we did, just as a really inept stand-up comic, and it blossomed from there. Heard he had passed. Say, well, Pee Wee's. I think that show happened. Must have happened after I had. It must have happened in the 90s. I'd become an adult by then. But no, the Pee Wee Herman show was in the early 80s, and then he had the movie was in 85, and then there was Pee Wee's Playhouse or something like that was from 86 to 89. So kind of right in the teenage years. I'm not exactly sure why I didn't watch a lot of it, other than the fact that I was going to a lot of baseball games and working. And so, do you have memories of Pee Wee outside of we saw him in the Blues Brothers?
He was just always funny. He was always did a lot of little cameos in movies, and he would just kind of steal the scene just because he was such a strong, present. He was like he's always doing a Saturday Night Live skit. He would just come in so strong, really funny. I know Pee-wee's Big Adventure is just like a classic movie. It seems like it keeps getting rediscovered by the younger generations, that 1985 film. And then, like you said, for some reason, maybe because I was out, but I would never watch Pee-wee's Playhouse, but I know it was groundbreaking. I mean, if you go back and watch clips of it now, it's just hilarious, and it just...
Let down your hair. Pee-wee short and tidy. Those friends have been invited to the wacky Pee-wee Playhouse. There's a crazy rhythm coming from Puppet Land.
It's just so groundbreaking, like how they'd speed up the film, and he'd be running around the room waving his arms all over, and it's just really funny stuff, and it's just really groundbreaking, and nobody's really replicated it to this point.
You and I both have a little bit of an offbeat sense of humor. We're drawn to stuff that's kind of outside the norms. So I don't know why it didn't catch on bigger with us.
So anyways, Brian, that's all we have for today's obituary. You say it. I can't say that. Obituary.
Yeah. So we're thinking, since none of us are getting any younger, and all the people that we are do this show to harken back to those 70s and 80s, both our childhoods, but also the the pop culture icons of the era of the 70s and 80s, and we are going to be seeing more and more of those obituaries going forward, and we'll touch base on that occasionally here on the 70s versus the 80s podcast. Just it's an ode to people, it's an ode to talent, an ode to artistry that was part of our, part of the fabric of our childhoods, and the sad, cruel hands of time keeps marching on, and they'll go on to the great beyond, and we will try to reminisce about them.
Yeah, and at the 70s and the 80s here, their heart will always go on. I had to play that song one more time. I had to, just to torture myself. I'm like that. I don't know. And that's going to wrap up another episode of the 70s versus the 80s, my babies. Thank you for joining us, and I would just like to thank you for all the tremendous support we've had lately. It's been excellent. Follow us on all the social media, especially Twitter or X or Twitter X or whatever their name is this week. We need some help over there. Follow us over there. If you have any questions for future shows, just reach out to us on social media like John Portnair did. He wants to hear Friday the 13th. We may have something coming up in October for that, John, so just listen. Oh, other than that, I'm leaving a link at the very end of the show notes for a speak pipe. You just hit the button, leave a little minute and a half recorded or shorter message, and you will hear yourself on the next episode, I promise. Thank you, everybody. This has been another episode of the 70s versus the 80s.
Eddie, I miss you more than all the others. This song is